So it's very nice to have you here, and we look forward to your seminar.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Doug, and it's great to be here. As you introduced, my background is meteorology and these things, but then I have been with WFP for the last 23 years in different positions. Now, so in this presentation, what I wanted to focus, as you have, this is an academic place, are some of the issues that I see may require a lot of research, may require a lot of discussions. So I would start, when I was in Egypt as country director for 7 years, I put the question to myself saying that, what is the issue of food insecurity in Egypt? If some of you who may have been to Egypt, if you look at the southern part of Egypt, it is all irrigation. But the land is small, and you have a lot of challenges also with the climate change. So a lot of people say, well, how is climate change impacting on irrigation in southern Egypt? So I spent some time to understand what the issues are. Now, we found two main issues. One is the land holding of the farmers was less than an acre for a family. Now imagine, less than an acre, there is nothing you could do in terms of changing your life. So somehow we need to find a way of consolidating land, which is not often easy. Then in terms of the climate issues, the climate change impact or the variabilities was that you would have a very strong hot wind, very hot, or in the winter you would get a very cold wind. Now, when the hot wind comes, the practice is irrigate. You just have to irrigate quickly. But if your land is not consolidated, even if you know it's coming, you cannot irrigate. So we experiment this in 60 villages. And today, the government is financing it. That project was about 8 million US dollars. But then the government, when they saw what was the impact, we scaled it up to 500 villages, and the government provided 50 million euros to WFP to do the work. As we speak now, they are doing it in 1,500 villages because it is helping the community to transform. You consolidate the land, you use the meteorological information to irrigate, and so on. Now, following this, then I was asked, in fact, I wanted to retire in Egypt. It's a beautiful place. You have all the historical places. But the executive director said, no, you are moving to Southern Africa, the regional director. Now, the reason is, in that part of the world, most of the countries are middle-income countries. There is good water, there is good land, there is educated people, but yet you have a huge food insecurity. So he said, can we help? Now, if I look at this so that in order to contextualize it, I will give you a bit of a regional overview of the food security in that part of the world. And then what are the real challenges that you have on food security in Southern Africa? So as I mentioned, in Egypt, we learned few of those, but what is it in Southern Africa? But then if you are working with governments, you need to understand the priorities. So we need to know the frameworks that governments are using. So we have highlighted those frameworks. And then with those frameworks, then we started regional engagement and then so forth. So it goes, you start from consultation and you move on into implementation of some innovative interventions. Now, just to give you a glimpse of what it looks, this is the number of food insecure people in Southern Africa. So in 2021, or you look at, it used to be 41.3 million. As we speak now, it is 59 million. In fact, in 2010, it was 24 million. So the food insecure people is increasing. And the economies of the world, the crisis is increasing as well, the climate change, and then so on. So if this is the trend, how do we reverse this trend? How do we ensure that food security is proper in those countries? Now, we can talk about, to meteorologists talking about Iraqi rains and then so on and so forth. Is singing to the converted. But we have interesting combination of weather patterns in Southern Africa. And particularly, let me focus on two countries, Mozambique and Madagascar. These are countries that you actually find in the same season, the same place could be hit by drought and cyclones. The same location. Now, this does not happen in many places, but here they are hit by the worst, the two extremes of weather conditions, the cyclones and the droughts. So when you have this kind of weather patterns, what do you do? How do you move forward? So essentially, we looked at what are the things that we should be doing. But before that, let me highlight what are actually the regional challenges, so that when we understand the regional challenge, then we can also together look at the solutions. What can we suggest as WFP? Now, you have conflicts. DRC is the richest. I have been 3 times to DRC. It is the richest place on earth. You have everything. You have minerals, you have water. I was just telling yesterday, Doug, if you are between Congo Kinshasa and Congo Brazzaville, there is the Congo River passes through that, and it's about 100 kilometers away from the sea. The depth of the river is around 200 meters. We are talking about this water going into the sea. The country is rich, but we have about 26 million people who are food insecure in such a, so something is not working. And of course, you look at the conflicts, it's actually all that is in the eastern part of the country. When you look at the central part of the country, there is no conflict, but there is no infrastructure, there is no investment. So how do we change that? Now, here, let me speak a bit about food systems. I know you guys are doing a lot of food system discussion. I would say the food system that we have in Southern Africa is fundamentally vulnerable. Now, why do I say that? Most of the production, 80 to 90%, is done by smallholder farmers, and mostly they are women. And they are using traditional tools, and it's rain-fed. Now, population is growing. Urbanization is growing. That kind of food system, that kind of production system is not going to cope with what is happening. Now, add to that climate impacts, add to that COVID, add to that all these price increases. So you have a food system, I don't know what the answer is. It must be transformed in somehow. But as it is, no matter what we treat here and what we do here, it's not going to change the food security situation. They would be dependent on imports. That region used to be food basket of the world. And now the imports is increasing every year. So that's one problem that we need to look into. The second is youth unemployment. So over the last 1 year, I have traveled to the 12 countries, and most of them 2, 3 times, some of them 4 times. And when I go to a country, I speak to the ministers, I speak to the heads of state, and so everyone, so that I start to understand what keeps them awake during night. Now, what keeps them up is youth unemployment. Because youth unemployment is also, if they don't help the youth, they are starting kicking them out of power. Now, so they must find ways of absorbing and creating employment for the youth. Now, the youth in that part of the world, they don't want to work in agriculture if the agriculture remains the way it is. I mean, a young person, you cannot tell, go and dig, here is a hole, and it just doesn't work. So on one hand, you have a vulnerable food system, and on the other hand, you have unemployment, and it's not much. So how do you then create opportunities for the youth so that you transform agriculture so it becomes attractive to youth? So we know this is the challenge. Now, what can we do about this? There are few things as WFP and also as humanitarian and as UN agencies we are trying to do. I will highlight there are three things that we started in the last few months. One is evidence generation, because we talk about youth unemployment. We talk about Ministry of Agriculture, Education, but they are not sharing information. So there are silos that they are not working together. So how do we help them so that when they start planning together, then they can actually have a better decision making? Now, we are piloting Lesotho, and as it used to be an area that I was doing, remote sensing, GIS, and all that. So what we are doing in Lesotho with the Prime Minister is actually to avail a 50 centimeter resolution satellite data for the entire country and have whatever is needed to make that work. And then we have a 3-meter resolution daily data that we get from another satellite. Now, the trick is this is available to every ministry. We are making it in such a way that it is available to every ministry. And then, of course, we have GIS and all the technology that go around it. Now, what's interesting is for each ministry, we are also supporting them to have their own data added to the system, because ministries, even not ministries only, even departments don't share information. So it's a difficult. So, but by putting this available for universities, for everyone, and then we say, now if you want to add, if you are Minister of Agriculture, you may need about the farm plots. Then you can upload that. If you are Minister of Education, you might want the schools to know where the schools are. You can do that. So this is one area that we are working, and we hope that this will be scaled up to other countries. And therefore, then with the research institutions like yourselves, then we will have evidence that we can actually do more rigorous research into what needs to be done. Because at this stage, even though the technologies, the data, the satellites are there, we are not using them as appropriate as we could. So that's one initiative that we are doing. The second initiative is, if you want youth to be interested in agriculture, then you must find a financing mechanism, because the real problem in the African continent is access to financing. The money you get from financing currently is very expensive. Now, if you are a farmer and you pay 30–40% of interest, you're not going to make profit. You're not going to sustain. So there is a need to avail affordable finance. 3 months ago, we signed, and in fact, it should be. Yeah, so this is actually one of those when we signed an MOU with the Afro-Exim Bank. This is an African export-import bank, and the shareholders are African governments, which is different from the World Bank and from the African Development Bank, where you have the donors and the countries. So sometimes decisions are made on what the donors think should be done. Whereas with this bank, it is the African governments decide what their priority. And in fact, they are interested to finance smallholder farmers. and they have put aside $2 billion for smallholder farmers. Now, their challenge is they don't know where the smallholder farmers are. They cannot communicate with them. As a bank, they are somewhere, but you need someone on the ground who is close to the farmers, and it happens WFP, we are there. So that's one issue why they want to work with us, so that we can actually help them. Here are these farmers, young people that can be supported, and we will help them also to ensure that those farmers pay back, because in the end, it's a bank. Secondly, the other group, so it's 3 institutions. And then the other one is the Africa Free Trade, the Area Free Trade Institution, which is an African institution again. Now, what that institution is trying to do is to actually trade within Africa. Because if you ask me what is the real problem in Africa in terms of, is you cannot buy from one country and take it to the other country. The tariffs or the barriers that are there, you make it impossible. So, for example, we realized that in Southern Africa, you could produce wheat. But why don't they produce wheat? Because the prices cannot compete with Ukrainian wheat, simply because it becomes expensive. So what CFTA is doing is breaking that, and so that we can have a trade within the continent. Now, if you want to trade, then there must be some produce. So that's where we come in, because we are helping the farmers to produce, and also as WFP, we are good at logistics and supply chains, all that area. So we bring that. So that is why we have an agreement, and now we are going to be working in 3 or 4 countries where they will provide finances for inputs, for trade, for processing, for value addition, the whole value chain. Plus, they will also finance private sector. So you bring in the private sector, you bring in proper financing mechanism, and then we hope that will work. So this is another involvement. The third is what I call rapid rural transformation, and we are implementing this in Madagascar. Now, what we try to do on this is, if you go to a village, think of a remote village in the African context. There are 2 main issues you find: lack of energy, electricity, and the lack of water. So you have families struggling, women getting the water, digging, and then so on. So if you don't, and then if you want to transform, we talk about digital transformation, but if you don't have electricity, that is not going to work. So, I was at the COP, and they were talking a lot about energy transition. Well, in this village, there is no energy transition. There is no energy. So it's actually moving straight into, like we moved from landlines, forget landlines, and we moved to mobiles. Here, this is what we are thinking. Now, what this does is, you have a solar panels, and this has worked in the private sector in Zambia. They have operated this for 3 years. When they started, they call it energy dispenser. So this is a private sector company, goes to a village where there is no electricity, where there is no water, and then they put this, and it is sustained. It actually, people pay for the service. Now, when I saw that, I said, okay, can you add into this system a water pump? Because sanitation for women in those villages, you need water. So this is modular, so they have added. In those 4 villages that we are doing in Madagascar, these are villages that have been hit by the cyclone and by the drought. So what we are saying is, look, you can be hit by drought and by cyclone, but if you put in technology, then you can start addressing this. So essentially on this, what you have is a digital school with tablets, computers, internet access. You have a community hub where the community can come together. You have an entrepreneurship halls, rooms, where you have agriculture processing machines. And essentially, it is, we call it village, a transformation village at a time. And so we are experimenting in 4 villages in Madagascar, and I hope, actually, as we speak, they are installing them in those 4 villages. And we hope this kind of, yes, it is a bit expensive, but it's a necessary thing to do. The banks, they ask me how much does it cost. So this system will produce 25 kilowatts, and this actually can provide up to 30 to 40 households with lights as well, not only the other processes. So it's around 220, 230,000 US dollars. Now people say it's expensive, but the banks, they said, but this is nothing, because you are transforming the whole village. So we are starting this, and the hope is, I want to see research done. What does it mean? What the impact? So I have a team now taking a drone picture of the area. We are taking the socioeconomic indicators so that we can see and of the whole area, including the village, so that we see what is the impact as we implement this. So these are 3 examples that, knowing the challenge, and we are trying to look at how do we implement this. Now, for all the 3 examples I gave, sustainability is an issue. So what we are doing is, on day 1, we are starting to find local expertise. If we need to create a company for them, we create a company for them. Because if you don't have that, and you bring in this technology, it will not continue. But at the same time, that also creates job opportunities. So the young will start getting engaged in the whole process. So this is our rural transformation, and that I mentioned earlier. This is the Lesotho example, where we have the evidence. And with that, you are professors here, so I wanted to listen, and I want to have a dialogue. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight into things ranging from science to policy and governments and communities. So thank you. So we've got time for questions now. So I would also say we're going to have time after this hour as well. We'll be out here and maybe have a coffee, and so there'll be time for more questions, more discussion. But now we'll have a kind of the usual kind of question and answer.
That's right.
So, Andy.
Be great to all answer. So much there. I could ask hundreds of questions. We're meeting later, so I probably will ask you. For now, could you say a little bit more about the satellite data that you're making available?
Yeah.
High resolution.
Yeah. Well, I can even tell you a bit of the history of that, because generally these advanced, high resolution data sets are available in countries, because the World Bank, when they do land registration, they actually acquire this data. However, because they do it through consultants, it is a single user license. So they use, after that, no one can use. So looking at this, basically it was not benefiting the countries. The data is already there. If it is there, why didn't we do a multi-user license? If you buy satellite data and you go for a multi-user at the beginning, it costs you 20% more. And imagine you can give it to whole ministries. But if you buy a single user, it doesn't work. Now, the satellite we are using is being provided through France, but it is a Chinese satellite. And it's exactly the same data that you would get, the expensive data from the US. Now the Chinese are making it available, and it's at 1/10 of the price of what you would get from the US satellite. So, but because it's high resolution, every farmer can, or decision maker, they can see their house. They can see the gully that is forming in front of their land. So by having that clear, and then we have, from Japan, we added a digital elevation model. So you actually know the topography and everything. Now, this becomes useful for planning, construction, you name it. But so at this stage, it's doable, it's affordable. It wasn't, and the data is there. And in fact, it's not new data. It's already acquired. So that's what we are trying to do. And then, of course, we add to that the GIS and the whole platform. So we call it a geospatial platform for Lesotho, for decision making and planning.
So is it visual satellite data by the sound of it, like the Google data? You're not talking about satellite rainfall estimates or NDVI?
No, this is it's not like NDVI. In fact, for the NDVI part, it is the 3-meter resolution that we are getting from Planet that can replace, that can be used. And it's daily, but 3 meters, which is high resolution. That is for the agricultural monitoring. This satellite data is basically, it gives you the whole structure at 50 centimeters resolution. You see everything. But you will do it once a year. You cannot do it every now and then. But once you have that and you add the digital elevation model, then you will see the topographic picture, the 3D picture of the place. Now, because it is done properly, then you can add any GIS data that you have from other sources. Even if you have the rainfall issues, whatever data you have, then you overlay it. And this is, we find it, we did this in Egypt when I was in Egypt. So it was not actually a new thing, but it's working.
So I was particularly interested in the challenges you mentioned about with smallholder farmers, and you mentioned consolidation as an approach to work out some of those challenges. And I wanted to, if you could elaborate, what do we mean by consolidation, and does, how does that affect land ownership rights? Because essentially what we said, just that right, and throughout your presentation, you were saying it's not okay just to bring a solution, but then that is not a long term, and we take away the benefits, let's say, from the local people. That's not really a solution. So could you please elaborate a bit? Thank you.
It's a very good question. And let's start by identifying what is the core issue. So if I say land consolidation, it is in Egypt because they have small land, it's irrigation, but it is too small. In Namibia, you want 5,000 hectares, you can get it. In Botswana, where my friend comes, Oratile, land is not a limit. So first, we need to identify what is it, the problem. So in Egypt, it is land holding. It is too small. Now, historically, if you say put your land together, farmers will not accept. If government comes and says, we want your land to be together, no, they don't trust governments. And this is everywhere. So what we have done is we created what we call community development association per village. And this where we registered them as an entity, as an NGO, legally registered. Then we ask them, put 10, 15 farmers who are like-minded to operate their land together. They are not giving the right on their land. They agree to operate the land together. So, and they know the percentage of their land. So their inputs are percentage-wise and their income is percentage-wise. So you just have to innovate what would work with a given community. So we tried in 60 villages. We went back to see how many of them then disintegrated. Very few out of the 60 villages that we had done. And those were, family feuds that caused those kind of things. But the rest, we doubled their income in 1 year. Then additionally, we looked at also the culture. In Egypt, southern Egypt, women don't work in agriculture, in the farms. So we found provision of goats and ducks to keep at home. So you have here now income from the women because the agricultural waste that comes is feeding the goats and the ducks. So the entire transformation then in the village, I'm very happy to have been associated with that. So that is on the area of when you have no land and you consolidate. Now, let me give you another example in DRC. In DRC, land is plenty, but someone owns it. So you have to find a way of buying the land for the poor. Now, I give you one specific example. In one area, in Kinshasa, we have 3 agencies, WFP, FAO, and UNICEF. We were helping farmers. We give them around $70 every month, and basically we are trying to see to change their lives. Now, I went there with all these people, the WFP and then so on. Now, that distribution we gave them was the last day. So $75 they got, and we say that is your last. So I asked one of the farmers, he was with his 2 beautiful children and beautiful wife standing there. And I said, you took $75. What did you do with that money? You know that we are done and we are going to leave. He said, I bought agricultural tools. But, you know, the spades, horse, and then so on. Now I asked him, dream. If you dream and you want these children to be happy and your wife to be happy, what would you need? He said, I'm renting this land, so I would want my own land. And I said, okay. And then I asked my colleagues, I said, how much does this land cost? First, I asked him how much land. He said 1 hectare. He said 1 hectare will make me happy. And I asked how much does 1 hectare cost? They told me $500. Now, imagine how many times we have given him the $70, $50. It was only $500. So I said, if we gave you loan, would you pay back? He said, I would pay in 2 years' time, but who would give it to me? Now, this is where I'm raising this because not understanding what the issue is. So our colleagues, I did a rough calculation. That day when we were visiting, with all the cars and everything, it cost us around $10,000. That is 20 households. 20 families would have been on that day only. So sometimes it is not understanding what the real issue is and then finding a solution. Now we are going to be buying 1,000 hectares and we are going to settle farmers. And of course, we are going to do with the Afro-Exim Bank because we know where the farmers are, and we are going to buy their produce because we import in DRC. We import food, a lot of food from US, from many places. We will replace that with the production. So it is understanding what the issue is and then looking at a solution.
Susan.
So super interesting. Thank you so much. So what I'm hearing you say is that actually, I wonder if the biggest problem, the fundamental problem, is a lack of local government, poor local governance. Because what you're saying is we need to better understand the issues on the ground on smallholder farmers, those farming. And I've seen in certain countries, I've seen an attempt at devolution or sort of empowerment at local levels, and speaking, participatory engagement with communities to find out what the real problems are, and then they're fed up to the next level, and if they get to the national level, and they're the same thing every time. More school classrooms, health clinics, is not actually anything to do with communities' need on their farm.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve agriculture at all, despite it being a fundamental requirement of development. And what you're saying is infrastructure is key, local infrastructure development and fundamental development fundamental development at local levels is necessary. So is part of the problem then local government, like power and local government, and failures to feed, to understand what's going on in local areas, because each country is very diverse, and then feeding that up to the national level. What can we do about that?
This is a very good, important question, but I would put it even bigger than that. The failure on food security is globally, we failed. The first World Food Summit was done in 1974. And in that conference, the world agreed that no child will go to bed hungry in 10 years. That was the agreement in 1974. No child in 10 years, by 10 years, no child will go to bed hungry. 1974, the world was poor. It's not as rich as it is. 1974, the technologies of today were not there. And yet our ancestors, our leaders, they were bold enough to say we are going to finish hunger in 10 years. Now, in 1996, when the Food Summit, the World Food Summit, what did we say? We will have the hungry by 50% or by this year. So we accepted that there should be hungry people going to bed. We will deal with half of them. Then the Millennium Development Goals, even worse. And then the SDGs, even worse than it was. So at one level, right? So the globe, how much did we spend for COVID globally? Trillions. And if we could spend something not that close, we could have deal with. So that's one, the global responsibility, accountability is not working. The main area is its governance. African governance is not working. You have the richest continent, and in somehow corruption and you name it, it's not working. But I'm optimistic now. Why? Because the power of the youth. In the past, you could hide and do whatever you have. Now the youth are not allowing governments to hide behind whatever. It is starting. Zambia, I was in Zambia, and I met the vice president. She told me the women and the youth put us in power. If we don't deliver, and they don't wait, if we don't deliver, they are going to kick us out of power. So that makes me feel optimistic. But yes, absolutely, it is failure of governments. Look at 1974, Bangladesh was actually the reason why they had the food summit was the famine of Bangladesh. Now, if you look at that, now Korea was a poor country in 1974, South Korea. Now look where they are. So it is governance is at the heart of it. Now, what we are saying is, given that, knowing all that, the debt, the debts that governments have, what can we do? As we are doing with the youth, if we also start empowering the communities through the RRT, through whatever we can, then hopefully we will generate enough interest and enough momentum to change the direction. But you are absolutely right, it's everywhere.
But you're promoting bottom-up solutions.
Because that is to challenge a system, a farmer who is doing okay in the community, they are going to challenge whatever system is there. The youth are going to challenge because, you go to the ministers, you speak to the minister. Actually, my counterparts, wherever I go, I don't leave a country without talking to the governors on the ground. In fact, as we speak, I'm starting to set up what we call governors network for sustainable development, because the governors are the ones who are on the ground, who are working. So if you empower those with the communication, that increased communication and whole world, we hope things will change.
That's really interesting for me, actually, because what you're emphasizing is you're not talking about policy so much. You're talking about actually action at the bottom up sense, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Just in terms of the zero hunger, WFP supports a lot of school feeding countries. I just want to know, in terms of assessment of the effectiveness and assessment of the sustainability, what you are doing.
School feeding, let's look at it from two angles. We have what we call homegrown school feeding. Essentially, what it means is in the rural areas, you can encourage farmers to produce, but where will they sell it? So if you make the school as a market, so they produce and then the school takes that food. So that is homegrown. Now what happens is actually they are producing locally. It is more, you don't spend a lot of traveling and you don't need a lot of infrastructure taking it to the market. So they are feeding their own children. So better food, better production, and enhancing, creating market. At the same time, if we don't have school children at schools, tomorrow's leaders are the children. So there is attendance problem, because if there is no food in the school, the children don't go there. You have dropouts. You have a whole problem with if you don't have school feeding. So that from the attraction of the food. But at the same time, when you have food, you also perform better in terms of the academic retention and so forth. So it's from different angles that we look at it. In Africa, we are really pushing on the homegrown. And this has been done in Brazil. So what Brazil has done, and they really supported smallholder farmers, is the smallholder farmers produce, and whatever institutional purchase is done by the government, 60% of that must be locally produced, so that it benefits the smallholder farmers. The problem we have with smallholder farmers is, for example, in South Africa, they cannot compete with the commercial ones. Basically, the price and the whole, they cannot. So in WFP now, we are buying from smallholder farmers up to 20% more expensive. We are allowed to buy from smallholder farmers. Just last year, we bought 120,000 metric tons from smallholder farmers. And these are basically, you buy from them and you are using it. From the continent in Africa, we bought 1 million metric tons, but that is from traders and from whoever. But 120,000 was just from smallholder farmers, because create the opportunity and so forth. But most of it goes to the school feeding type of activity. So it's a whole. We are working with UNICEF on the curriculum discussions, because we are not the experts on what should be the teaching and learning process. But we know children must eat, and then we focus on the nutritional part of the food.
There's quite a few of us here, but really interested in the African food system, thinking about it. And one of the things you've talked a lot about is, on the one hand, that smallholder farming can't compete within that kind of broader food system. But at the same time, you're supporting smallholder farmers and trying to encourage smallholder farmers. So there's a real tension in the position of smallholder farmers within the African food system. And you see it in terms of when you, like the transformation of the food system in Southeast Asia has been a move away from smallholder farmers. But that has implications for livelihoods. It moves people into cities, it causes urban slums, it does all sorts of other things. So I kind of wondered, from your standpoint and from the World Food Programme standpoint, transformation of the African food system, what does that look like? What do you think that should look like?
No, a very good point. And when I am talking about smallholder farmers, I'm looking at, can we move from subsistence into smallholder farmer production, but with a commercial mind? Because that is the problem, is when you have a hoe and so on, you cannot even produce enough for yourself. So when I speak about transformation, is not to buy the land and take it away from the smallholder farmers, but make the smallholder farmers competitive by creating the market like the full homegrown that we do, create modernization, small mechanization. Even instead of digging a hole, there are mechanisms that you could use that improve your agricultural productivity. A woman cannot do a hectare, even if the land is there. Physically, it's limited. But if you help, and then also on the supply chain, the value addition, the whole process, the youth employment, they may not go into the farm itself, but they may be happy to trade with it. So when I say, the smallholder farmers transformation is not because, look, the population in African continent is heavily rural. Now, huge unemployment. The only place that you could generate employment quickly is in the agricultural sector. With basic support, you can accelerate that. Now, the whole idea then is, what does it mean? Is it cooperatives? Is it so? When I said we will buy the 1,000 hectares, we are going to distribute it to maybe 200 farmers or 300 households. But we are looking from now, how do we make sure that then they don't divide again and again, so that it becomes, then again a small piece. What business model do we need? So it is a whole. We don't have. I don't have the real, clear answer, but the thinking that we have is, how do we transform? And it depends also from country to country. In South Africa, it's a real problem. The commercial farmers, you can't compete with them. The supermarket is everywhere. If you are traveling South Africa in the rural area, you find a supermarket. So a poor farmer producing there is never going to be able to compete. But I'm discussing with the government, South African government. They have a lot of prisons, and they buy food for the prison. They have a lot of hospitals. They buy food for those. They have a lot of schools. They buy food for those. And then we are telling them, buy it from the smallholder farmers, and we will help it coordinate and bring the scale. But you are absolutely right. It is a challenge. Where is the balance?
I was just going to ask one last thing about. Sorry, but sustainable, sustainable finance. We talked about the villages with electric power, but in the end, how do you pay for that? Pays.
Yes, that's a very good point, and everyone asked me that question. You are putting this Mercedes type of product in the rural area, and how is going to be maintained, and who is going to pay for it? We are doing two things. One is to demonstrate. We want to demonstrate it is possible to do it. So at this stage, we have bought those systems, and we are donating them to the governors. With the governors are setting up small companies to maintain and work on these machines, or on these units. Now the idea is, what they have done in Zambia, it is actually self-sustained. The revenue you bring from charging on the electricity, it actually maintains the system. It is expensive, but then we are arguing with governments, saying that if they were part of the grid, it will be much cheaper energy, right? But when you are far, it is more expensive, but it should have been the opposite. You should support those poorer people. So we are talking about subsidy programs to initiate and make it a business. But once you have 100, 200, 300 units, then you have a scale that will allow you to actually have real companies working on this in a sustainable way. Because it's real, no one goes into those villages. No one is interested in those villages. So we are taking this into them. Now, also when you read around, the world is going from, you go to the service. It used to be in the old days, you look at where the service is and you aggregate around the service. Now services are going to individuals, wherever you are. That's the trend that we have. So with this village, they are not going to be waiting for a grid and big infrastructure. So we are taking the unit into the village. So we are taking the education, the health, because this unit does have all for vaccines and so on. So, but the sustainability issue is, yes, it is a challenge. And that's why we try to bring the young people, engineers, and then so on, and create opportunities for them, create jobs for them. Then the Afri-Exim Bank, that is a bank, is happy and ready to finance this kind of, over 10 years, 15 years, they are happy to finance this. And that's why we signed with them as well.
We've probably got a minute for the last question.
So just, it's a terrible question to finish on. It sounds like, as well as the kind of all of the individual issues that you mentioned, there's a real fragmentation of knowledge about different bits of the system, of power in terms of policy versus actual power on the ground power, of kind of expertise, the capacity of finance. All of these things are going to different places. So talking to a group of academics, who do we talk to work out what the big and important questions that need to be answered are? And how do we kind of try and bring those different bits of the fragmented thing together?
Well, my friend, it's a very good question. It's not, it's a good question, and it's actually is the slide that I did not put, and as you can see, there are policy decisions in the African continent. The African Union has passed many, many declarations. Every year, ministers meet and so on. What is lacking is implementation. So what we have done here is we actually took, just this year, we have the Kinshasa Declaration, which was in January, Malabo Declaration, which was adopted humanitarian center, and then close to use the Maputo Declaration is actually the meteorologists, the disaster risk reduction. It was actually the WMO who were leading it. So we took this together, and when you look at them, they are the same. They are addressing the same issue, but they are coming in different directions. So I'm setting up, as we speak, I'm setting up a team of 4 people at the moment, senior people, to be based in the SADC Secretariat, to actually focus on the implementation of these declarations, because that is what is missing. The policy documents, there are a lot of them. Clear, we talk about the SDG 2030, and then you have our 2063, and then when you go through those, it's very clear what needs to be done, but no one is doing that. So we are setting a team. We are just actually finalizing the recruitment now, so that we put a team that is there within the SADC Secretariat, but it will serve the continent. So that how do you take a policy document, declaration, and then how do you link it with implementation on the ground?
So I think that was a very good question. Thank you. Yeah, but also I think the other part is to answer that is that Menghastab is here today. So and the next hour is unstructured. So if you want to hang around, you can also come directly and ask the questions directly. So so I'll just thank you again for a sort of inspiring hour, and thank you for your talk. Great. Let's check the questions online, but time is.
Checking, there's 4 people online, but they've said thank you. They didn't have to.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I would love to take more discussion. It's been brilliant, and that's why people allow. I'm also the kind of they really wanted to do that.